answered and taken care of. All right. Well, so today, as I was preparing for today's message, based on a story about courage and spies and prostitution, I couldn't help but think of my teenage years. No, it's not what you think. I was really a pretty good kid, all things considered. Probably the worst tomfoolery that I got into was my buddies and our propensity for pranks. Some of you all recall the story I shared about the kidnapping the baby Jesus from the town square nativity scene. And if not, I'm sure you'll hear about it later. But on another occasion, we smuggled out the mannequin that was used in our science class. You remember those mannequins that have the removable, like, organs and stuff? We smuggled that out of our classroom and took it to the house of our science teacher in the middle of the night and left the mannequin standing on his porch. We got a lot of satisfaction from this, but we only could imagine it because, you know, we pictured him going in his robe and his morning coffee and stepping out and being shocked by the mannequin with the insides falling out. But we could only imagine it because he didn't say anything. We could assume he just tossed it in his car, took it back to school, put it back in its place, and didn't say anything. Of course, we weren't going to ask about it because then that would give us up. And, you know, we were very sneaky. I'm sure he had no idea it was us. But our prank passion project was not baby Jesus or the mannequin. It was the mission to TP our principal's home. Now, for those of you who didn't grow up in my era, TP stands for toilet papering. It's the juvenile practice of trespassing on someone's property and throwing rolls of toilet paper through the air on the trees in the home. It sounds simple enough. Drive up, throw the toilet paper, and leave. But our principal, known as Mr. Chapman, had a good-sized farm that presented several challenges. The only easy access to his house was on the north side of the property that runs State Route 95. So there's too much traffic, and there was actually a sheriff's office nearby. So we couldn't do that. Well, to the east and to the west was crops, was corn and soybeans and some cattle grazing fields. So we couldn't do that. That was too far, too risky. The only way to get there was from the south side. And Mr. Chapman's son and his family lived on the south side. So we had this plan. We were going to park on a county road that was low traffic. We were going to sneak through his son's yard, go through the woods, hop a couple cattle fences, and then do our deed. Leaving him with a decade's worth of bath tissue. But each time we tried, something went wrong. One time, my brother's friend fell into some barbed wire and looked like he was mauled by a bear. Another time, I had an unfortunate encounter with an electrified fence on a tender part of the male body. Another time, his son noticed something was awry on his property, and he came out with a searchlight. I don't know who has a searchlight laying around, but he did, and was chasing us around, and we had to leave. There was always something. We were lucky it was only a light, actually, because this is rural Ohio. There's a lot of firearms out there, and in fact, on another occasion, we did a friend's house, and his dad came out screaming with a shotgun. Truly terrifying. once we did manage to make it through the yard, through the woods, over the fences, into Mr. Chapman's yard, where we began silently throwing the toilet paper rolls in the air gracefully into the trees. We were in the flow, full of glee and pride, when all of a sudden, I spotted none other than Mr. Chapman, coming out of his side door with his hat, jacket, and boots. I alerted the guys around me, and they dove under some spruce trees. And then I snuck over to my friend Jeremy, who was a little ways off, and I whispered forcefully, "It's Mr. Chapman, hide!" "Mr. Chapman?" "Yes, he's out here, get down." "Mr. Chapman is outside?" "Yes, hurry up and hide." I dove behind a bush, but by this time it was too late. Jeremy had been spotted. Mr. Chapman cleared his throat and said with a sly grin, "Need some help, boys?" In shame, we were not only defeated, but then we had to clean up our mess. You can go to this slide. This is a part of our graduating class. Believe it or not, that's me with my arms around. Those are my two friends, Jeremy and Jacob. They're twins. So a little picture of that. We never forgave Jeremy for his obtuseness, and we never forgot our mission. However, by our senior year of high school, we did wise up enough to know we needed to do two things. One, include some girls in the project, much smarter than us. And two, completely change our objective. Now, Mr. Chapman was a man of faith, and we were convinced that every time we entered his land or any danger came near him, an angel of the Lord tapped him on the shoulder, woke him up. It was probably more that we were just inept. And we found out that night that he caught us, Mr. Chapman just had gotten up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, as 70-year-old men are wont to do, and happened to notice something out the window. But we felt like we had to outwit both Mr. Chapman and his guardian angel. So together we came up with an alternative plan. We would scrap the teepee and instead settle for a senior class surprise in his barn. We would stay the night in his hayloft, and when he came out to get hay for the cows, we would jump out and surprise him and declare victory. We could graduate with honors. And really, what greater gift of gratitude could we offer him for his service than being startled into a potentially lethal heart attack by his most annoying students? But this time we did it right. When we knew he and his wife would be gone, we had somebody drive us in, drop us off, climbed into the hayloft, and we're mostly able to be quiet. And then, as he did every morning, Mr. Chapman came in, get some hay to feed the cows, and we jumped out. We were ready, and surprised him with our shouts of victory. Thankfully, he didn't have a heart attack. He didn't actually act all that surprised. He wasn't all that impacted by it. He claims he didn't know we were there. He was just unshakable. And we gave him a precious memory to take with him after we graduated. He wasn't mad. In fact, he actually invited us to come inside and have breakfast. Mrs. Chapman came from an Amish Mennonite background and was an amazing cook and made an amazing hearty breakfast for us. And so graciously, we came inside for a few laughs and a nice breakfast, and all of us were finally at peace. These are the kinds of stories I get to tell when Ashlyn's gone. She can't stop me. I learned a couple things from this prank era of my life. One is that stealth is hard. It's harder when you're stupid. No, I'm just kidding. It's hard to be sneaky and stealthy. A lot of things can go wrong. And second, things can sometimes go right. Sometimes people are kind and invite you in for a few laughs and are delicious. breakfast. Now, of course, this was a goofy thing and a very low-stakes mission. I tell it playfully, there's not really a spiritual message in it, but today's story is about a much more serious and high-stakes mission by a pair of Israelite spies. It's a story about courage. And initially, you might think it's about the courage of those spies. But it turns out to be much more about the courage of a woman who had the courage to be kind to them, even when they were invading her city and planning to destroy it. She invited the trespassers in for breakfast, so to speak, and ultimately saved their lives and the life of her family. Her name is Rahab. And Robin is going to read the scripture passage for us this morning that's found in the book of Joshua, chapter 2, verses 1 through 21. Joshua 2, 1 through 21.
Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, "Look, some of the Israelites have come over here to spy out the land." So the king of Jericho sent a message to Rahab, "Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because you have come to spy out the whole land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them, and she said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know who they were or where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them." But she had actually taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax that she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went out up on the roof and said to them, "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites, east of the Jordan, and whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts were melted in fear, and everyone's courage fell because of you. For your Lord, your God, is God in heaven, above all of the earth and below. Now then, please swear by the name of the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I've shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father, my mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death."
Oh, sorry, flip it around on back.
"Our lives for your lives," the men assured her. "If you don't tell what we are doing, then we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land." So she let them down by rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She said to them, "Go to the hills so that the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, and then go on your way." Now the men had said to her, "This oath has made us swear will not be binding on us unless we enter the land. You have tied the scarlet cord in the window through which you have let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house. If any of them go outside of your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head, if a hand is laid on them. But if I tell you what we're doing, we will be released from the oath that you've made us swear." "Agreed," she replied. Let it be as you say. So she went away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. God is still speaking.
Thanks be to God. Thank you, Alvin. So to understand the text, it's helpful to have some context and to review the longer story that this story is located in. You may remember the story from a couple weeks ago about Moses and his mother. And at that time, the Hebrew people were slaves in Egypt. And you remember the midwives that helped save those kids. The Hebrew people were slaves, and they cried out to God to liberate them, and God did. God got them out of Egypt, and as she recounted, opened the Red Sea, and then they continued on their long Exodus journey through the wilderness. As they prepared to enter the Promised Land, the leader, Moses, sent out 12 spies to go do reconnaissance on the land they were going to go into. They were charged with finding the best route to travel, but they kind of took a different approach. 10 of the 12 returned with terrifying, dramatic stories about the inhabitants of this land, and they actually suggested, let's not go. It's too dangerous. That wasn't really their purpose. But fear overcame faith in the group. And they ended up wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, essentially until the whole generation of people had died off. So there's a map here that shows the first route. You'll see how it takes a long way around because they were wandering for 40 years. One of the two spies that had come back with a good report and said, we can do it and God's going to help us, his name was Joshua. Joshua became the next leader after Moses died. With a new generation of leadership and families, they're once again poised to enter the Promised Land. But they still need some information, so Joshua sends out 2 people this time, 2 spies. Instead of 12, some scouts. And they make their way to the city called Jericho, which Joshua was especially concerned about. Jericho is actually one of the oldest cities in the world, and the first walled city. It's estimated to be as old as 9,000 BCE. It was also considered a wicked city, full of corruption and violence and idolatry. So the 2 spies made their way into the city, and next thing you know, it says they entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. This makes us wonder, what were they doing there? Scholars debate the reason for their presence in this house, as you might imagine. Some suggest it's exactly what we think. They were men with needs and no longer being supervised in the city. And the city provided a way to meet those needs. So they took advantage of that opportunity. It would not have been the first time this happened in the stories of the Bible. These scholars point out that the Hebrew phrase for spent the night is possibly a euphemism, like when we say somebody slept with someone else. Others argue that this house of ill repute was simply the most covert place to go into the city, and a good place to get intel, a place where secrets are leaked and stories are told. Some scholars argue that Rahab was not so much a prostitute as an innkeeper or maybe a madam. When the king calls on her for information, she does seem to have this kind of reputation and respect, a certain standing in the city that would have been different from just the common sex worker. Regardless, the spies have somehow been spotted in the city, and they're in her home, as we played out earlier. The king tells her to tell him everything she knows, sends out the soldiers. What will she do? If she told the king what she knew, she would probably gain favor and influence with him. But if she got caught lying, that would probably be the end of her. It was really an easy choice. Should have been an easy choice. But that's not the choice that she made. She made a courageous choice. That saved the scouts, saved her family, and shaped history. So what can we learn about from Rahab about courage? First of all, courage requires resourcefulness. Rahab was a woman of courage who learned to be resourceful. As a woman in the ancient Near East, she had little choice but to be resourceful. She did what she had to do to survive and take care of her family. It's easy for us to sit in the safety of our 21st century setting and assume that this woman was promiscuous and immoral. But consider how limited her options were at that time and place, especially for a woman who apparently could not have children. Based on that context and the story itself, we're better off assuming her choices were more about being resourceful than immoral. I think of the words of Augustus McCrae from the novel and movie Lonesome Dove. Anybody remember that movie? Book, Lonesome Dove. Gus, played by Robert Duvall, is a Texas lawman and cattleman who is in love with a prostitute named Lorena. He calls her Lori Darling. And he says at one point, she was doing what she could, but don't hold it against her. She was doing what she could, but don't hold it against her. I also think of Jesus, a man known for his friendship with prostitutes and others that people label sinners. In a moment before his death, a woman comes and anoints his head with an expensive perfume, and the other guests around the table are not happy. They say it's inappropriate, it's expensive, it's wasteful. And Jesus defends her and says, leave her alone. She's done something beautiful. She did what she could. She did what she could. And Rahab did what she could. Most of us are doing what we can. I'm not saying everything goes. I'm not saying we should never call out harmful behavior or call people into better ways. But you may have heard the saying from psychology, every behavior makes sense in context. Every behavior makes sense in context. Most folks are doing what they learned to do to survive. So maybe when we see someone struggling, doing something we don't like or agree with, we can at least start with the assumption that their behavior makes sense in context. At some point, it helped them survive. Maybe they're doing what they can, and we can offer support and care, and then hopefully at some point maybe help them find a different way. There's a saying that I'm learning to live by. Be kind. Everyone you know, everyone you meet, is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind. Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Rahab was fighting a battle we know nothing about, but she was fighting. She was making the most of her situation, doing the work available to her. And when two strange Israelite scouts came into her home, she saw an opportunity. She believed in their God, believed in the promises of their God. And maybe if she put that belief into action and helped them, a new future would open for her. So she used what she had. She used her roof. And she used the flax that she had harvested. Flax was a plant that was used for making bedding and clothing. She hid them under the flax. Then she used her savvy and her words skillfully to redirect the soldiers and then make a deal with the spies. She's sharp. And finally, she makes a red cord, a kind of rope that she used to help the men escape. and then later to indicate where her home was, to spare her and her family from the destruction that was to come. Rahab was a sex worker, but she was also a resourceful woman of faith and courage. And she reminds us of the good news that we can be more than our worst decisions or complicated histories. Each day, each moment, we have the freedom to make a new choice and do the next right thing. And then the next right thing until we make a more positive path. Because of the courageous decisions that Rahab made, she became a woman of valor in Judaism. Remember how Gideon, the angel came and said that he was a mighty man of valor. Rahab became a mighty woman of valor, and she's actually mentioned 3 times in the New Testament by name. In Matthew, we learned that she eventually was able to have children and actually became part of the lineage of Jesus of Nazareth. In Hebrew, she's named in that Hall of Faith passage as a woman of great faithfulness. And in James, she is cited as an illustration of how faith leads to good works, how our belief should lead to just actions. So we're not bound to our past. By the grace of God and some courageous steps on our part, we can tell new stories about our lives. Secondly, Rahab reminds us that courage calls us to take risks. Courage calls us to take risks. John Wimber, the founder of the Vineyard movement, used to say, faith is spelled R-I-S-K. Rahab was literally risking her life to do what she believed was right. She took the same approach as another courageous woman of Scripture named Esther, you may have heard of. She spoke up for her people even though it could backfire. And she said, if I perish, I perish. If I perish, I perish. Most of us will not face a situation that requires life-risking courage, though some of us may. Most of the time we risk other things. Loss of income, impacted reputation, friendships, our well-sculpted image. Sometimes doing the hard thing and doing brave things means people might stop liking us. In this polarized climate, there's always saying or doing anything is liable to upset someone. So we have to make choices. Who will I prioritize? Who will I prioritize pleasing, and who will I prioritize offending? Chief among them should be our Creator and the people who are most vulnerable in our communities. Now, when I read Rahab's story, I can't help but think of our Quaker forebears who were conductors on the Underground Railroad. Quakers were not perfect, but there were many who followed their divine leadings to oppose slavery and assist black freedom seekers who were escaping slavery. Quakers were some of the earliest white people in America to oppose slavery. By the late 1700s, they had completely eliminated slavery from their membership. George Washington actually complained in 1786 about the annoying society of Quakers who were trying to liberate his neighbors' slaves. Quakers were very instrumental in the Underground Railroad across the North and the South, and some of the most prominent white leaders were Quakers. I only emphasize white because there's not as good records about black leaders. Except for a few, major figures like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. So some of the Quakers were friend Isaac Hopper. Oh yeah, you can go back to that. There's some routes, Underground Railroad routes, and you can see there's one here in East Tennessee. It goes through there. Go to the next one though. Friend Isaac Hopper in Philadelphia was one of the most prolific organizers, creating networks of safe havens and informants on fugitive hunters. Levi Coffin, who lived in North Carolina and Indiana, was known as the president of the Underground Railroad. He was a Quaker. But we don't even have to go that far to draw from this history. This region used to be home to a large number of Quakers and several Quaker meetings. As early as the 1700s, as you know, by organized 1796 here. Friendsville Friends Meeting nearby was founded in Blount County, still open, as well as the very nearby Lost Creek Friends Church. Both had members taking risks and using their resourcefulness to provide shelter for freedom seekers on their home and on their land. They also provided shelter for conscientious objectors during the Civil War and people who were going up north to join the Union Army. It's believed that they assisted, the Friendsville and Lost Creek Friends assisted over 2,000 people who were escaping slavery or Confederate conscription. One example is the Hackney family. William Hackney, I couldn't find a picture of him. This is Friendsville Friends meeting house. The Hackney family had a large hidden cave on their property that could accommodate up to 50 people at a time. They kept it stocked with food and bedding and supplies. And oral tradition says that there was a cave used by Lost Creek Friends, that it was probably lost when they built 11E. Understand that this was very risky. A man from Straw Plains, the Straw Plains area, named Spencer Deaton, he was not a Quaker, but that I'm aware of. He was a pilot, they call it, who helped men from the South who wanted to go up and join the Union Army. And he was caught by the Confederate Army outside Knoxville, transported to Virginia, and hanged, while the locals came over and watched. In their records, the Confederate soldiers said that they hoped the public hanging would promote greater loyalty from residents of places like East Tennessee. East Tennessee had a lot of Union sympathizers and agitators along with Quaker abolitionists. This lack of loyalty was even more acute because the rocky hills and mountains of East Tennessee were not conducive to large plantations. So they didn't really even benefit from the slave economy very much. The landscape also made it easier to sneak around in the backwoods and help Unionists and freedom seekers through the woods avoiding the occupying army. Another famous Underground Railroad conductor was named John Rankin. He was born in Dandridge. Did you know this? Some people? Okay. He lived in Jefferson County growing up, went to college in Johnson City, became a Presbyterian pastor in Jefferson County. I did some digging, and as best as I can tell, he was the pastor at Mount Horeb Presbyterian Church, which I believe is still standing, but it's not an active church anymore. They had members from the Market Presbyterian and from a Dandridge Presbyterian church that came together and started this church. He did not thrive there. They did not like his very strong, very clear abolitionist message. It's on Dumpling Valley Road, by the way. This is a specific location. They encouraged him and his family to find somewhere else to minister. And so he eventually moved up to Ripley, Ohio, which is just on the other side of the Ohio River, which was a very strategic place on the Underground Railroad. He built a house up on what's called Liberty Hill that was visible to freedom seekers. He was said to have aided over 2,000 people. He worked closely with Quakers in the Cincinnati area, and I also found out that when he lived in Jefferson County, he was influenced by a Quaker by the name of Charles Osborne. Anybody know that name? Yes. Osborne moved to Tennessee by way of North Carolina in the early 1800s as a kid. His family lived in Knoxville and worshiped with a Quaker meeting there until he was what they call written out of meeting because he didn't live simply enough. So I don't know exactly what he did, but he got in trouble, but he eventually reconciled and rejoined. But after a time, he and his wife moved to Jefferson County and became members of Lost Creek Friends Church, where he started the Tennessee Manumission Society in 1815. The first one in the state of Tennessee. Unfortunately, he too ended up having to move to Ohio, then Indiana, to work for liberation from the free states. There's a lot of other fascinating things that we'll have to say for another time. I kind of went down a rabbit hole last night doing this research, but it's fascinating. William Lloyd Garrison called him the father of all abolitions. And that started right here in Tennessee, and mostly right here at Lost Creek. So these people are our heritage. As East Tennessee folks, as Quakers, as members of Lost Creek Friends. And the story of Rahab is our heritage as followers of the way of Jesus. Their courage calls us to be resourceful, to take risks, and finally, to be kind. To be kind. Rahab reminds us that kindness is courageous. Kindness is courageous. The possibility of this whole encounter between the spies and Rahab is based on the power of kindness. And before they leave, she asks them to remember her kindness by showing their own kindness when they came back for Jericho, and they did. Kindness isn't just courtesy and niceness, though that's part of it. Kindness is a commitment to honor each other's humanity and dignity, to be committed and compassionate to one another, because we really are our brothers and sisters keepers. Kindness in Scripture has to do with covenant. We make a covenant in love with God and one another that comes with freedom and responsibilities. The prophet Micah summarized it this way. God has showed us, O mortal, what is right, what is good, and what does God require of us? To do justice, to love mercy, or to love kindness, and to walk humbly with our God. If you ever want to memorize a scripture verse, that's a good one. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. That word for mercy in kindness is the same one that Rahab uses for kindness. Chesed. Can you say that? Chesed. In Hebrew. It's a very hard word to translate. It's very rich. So the Bible translators use many words. Faithfulness, loyalty, kindness, mercy, loving kindness. It's the kind of kindness that God shows us, and then we extend that to others. Our culture at large seems to be moving toward a crisis of kindness. We are increasingly suspicious of one another and cynical about the power of love. There's even a growing sense that kindness is weak. But people of faith need to be ones who insist that kindness is courageous. That our God is a God of covenant kindness, and we are called to offer that to our families, to our neighbors, and sometimes even like Rahab, to people considered our enemies. Understand how surprising this passage is to people that read it later. It was supposed to be the Israelite spies that are the heroes, but the Canaanite prostitute woman becomes the hero. It's a reminder that God's light is found all over the place. You never know. That's why we look through that look through that spyglass and see what's out there and who's out there. The 19th century Australian poet Adam Lindsay Gordon put it this way. Life is mostly froth and bubble. Two things stand like stone. Kindness in another's trouble. Courage in your own. Kindness in another's trouble. Courage in your own. Be strong and courageous, Joshua said. Told the people time and time again. And that's great, but maybe our time calls for a slightly different call. Be kind and courageous. Be kind and courageous. So in light of this call to be resourceful and take risks and be kind, I'm going to keep today's queries, the questions, simple. Not easy, but simple. How are you as an individual called to be kind and courageous? And how are we as a congregation called to be kind and courageous? Let's spend a few minutes in waiting worship, pondering those, listening for the still small voice. If there's something you feel prompted to share, please feel free to do so.